Imagine this: a handful of influential, powerful men armed with the capability to destroy the entire planet with just one command. Such horrific firepower, spurred by the space race, the arms race, and nuclear testing, among other things, contributed to the event known as the Cuban Missile Crisis of October 1962, where nuclear firepower were at the fingertips of men who ran the affairs of the United States, the Soviet Union, and Cuba. These superpowers were locked in a monumental struggle that tested their resolve and moral judgment, inevitably marking a moment in history where the world was closest to the state of nuclear warfare.
Our goal is not the victory of might, but the vindication of right. Not peace at the expense of freedom, but both peace and freedom here in this hemisphere, and we hope around the world. God willing, that goal will be achieved.
This is a story of unintended consequences. They are neither heroes nor villains, just human beings who are flawed, sometimes dangerously so, and whose dramatic risk-taking created equally dramatic history.
The causes of the missile crisis was varied and many. Misconceptions, greed, fear. John F. Kennedy, Fidel Castro, Nikita Khrushchev, they all collided because they were all reckless, each driven by a sense of what was best for themselves and for their people. Khrushchev pursued power. He wanted to rival the United States, ideally surpassing it, all in the name of ensuring the longevity of the Soviet Union. Castro wanted to lead a revolution through Latin America while keeping the American colossus at bay. And finally, John Kennedy, whose country was feared by both Castro and Khrushchev, was too cautious. He underestimated his own power. Kennedy tried to gain quick victories through indirect means, but ultimately found himself caught by numerous problems. The missile crisis occurred mainly due to the following reasons: the built-up tension between major world powers due to the space race, the nuclear arms race, American funding of anti-communists in Vietnam and Laos, the Vienna Summit of 1961, and the Berlin Wall, Fidel Castro's rise to power in Cuba, and the invasion of the Bay of Pigs in April 1961. To understand the nature of these causes, we have to understand the events leading up to the crisis. In the period between 1955 and 1963, the Cold War was at the pinnacle of tension. In 1955, Khrushchev created the Warsaw Pact, a military alliance of communist countries that carried detailed plans of how to wage nuclear warfare, if one happened, against NATO, an intergovernmental military alliance created under the North Atlantic Treaty of 1949. The US was part of this alliance. Tensions rose on October 4, 1957, when the Soviet Union launched Sputnik, the first artificial satellite released into space. Because of the satellite, the Soviet Union confidently exhibited their ability to launch missiles that would be able to reach any part of the world. The United States, subsequently, launched their own satellite on October 31, 1959, sparking the space race between the two superpowers. The space race was done under the pretense of knowledge for science and exploration. In actuality, the space race developed technology critical to the delivery of nuclear weapons, ICBM boosters, or intercontinental ballistic missiles, with Khrushchev calling such missiles the gods of war. These developments also aided in the competition for the supremacy of nuclear warfare during the nuclear arms race, hence the mass manufacturing of nuclear stockpiles by the US and Soviet Union. In 1959, Fidel Castro, a rebel, took power in Cuba over the old authoritarian regime of Colonel Batista. Batista's government, though corrupt in its military dictatorship, allowed the production of many American business interests in Cuba. However, when Castro took power, he nationalized all American companies. In retaliation, the Americans halted all imports of Cuban sugar, effectively causing a huge negative impact, as sugar was the backbone of the Cuban economy. Castro, consequently, was forced to seek help. In 1960, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, or USSR, signed a trade agreement to exchange sugar for oils and machines, and also for the Union to buy 1 million metric tons of sugar each year. Castro, who previously was not a communist, became one after this event. Kennedy was elected in January 1961 on the promise that he would be tough on communism. Thus, on April 1961, in response to Castro, the CIA trained, funded, and transported roughly 1,000 armed, anti-Castro Cuban exiles to invade Cuba at the Bay of Pigs. This invasion was a disaster. It dreadfully failed, significantly embarrassing Kennedy in the process. Furthermore, Kennedy had to endure the humiliation at the Vienna summit of the following June, where Khrushchev haughtily basked in his success with Cuba, reinforcing the notion of the alleged missile gap between the US and the Soviet Union. Tension between the two leaders also escalated when the issue of Berlin dominated the meeting, where Kennedy's refusal on the withdrawal of Western armed forces of West Berlin later caused the erection of the Berlin Wall. On September 1961, as a response to the Bay of Pigs, Castro requested weapons from Russia to defend Cuba against America. The Soviet Union publicly promised to aid Cuba, which in turn instilled fear within the American people upon the discovery of missile sites in Cuba. This discovery was the start of the Cuban Missile Crisis. Initially, Khrushchev, through summit meetings, stated that he wanted peaceful coexistence with the West. Because of such statement, the Western leaders thought that Khrushchev would bring an end to the Cold War due to the seemingly peaceful anti-Stalin speeches, such as his declaration at the 22nd Congress in 1961 that the period of the dictatorship of the proletariat was at an end, and that he would bring in instead the state of the whole people. Such notion of peaceful coexistence, however, was shot down due to the actions made by Khrushchev. By peaceful coexistence, Khrushchev essentially meant peaceful competition, hence the space race and the arms race between Russia and America.
We have to understand the social aspects of these events. After World War II, communism became a global phenomenon. Anti-communism became an integral part of the domestic and foreign policies of the US and NATO. The United States made anti-communism the top priority of its foreign policy, hence the American favor of Kennedy due to his distaste for communism. Anti-communism in the US became a social norm. Here you have the leftists and you have the rightists. The leftists are socialists, communists. On the other hand, you have the rightists, capitalists, nationalists, fascists, you name it. We've got to remember that although Batista's regime was a right-wing military dictatorship, he wasn't a communist. Sure, he was a pro-capitalist in economic matters, and it is a dictatorship, but authoritarianism doesn't necessarily mean communism, right? When Castro led the Cuban Revolution, what do you think happened? The situation rapidly changed into a socialist revolution. The Americans feared that Castro would go too far to the left, while the Soviets feared that he would go too far to the right. However, the intensity of their fears were hardly comparable. For the Russians, it was just another case of, nationalist leader with radical phrases. For the United States, however, it was like Sputnik all over again, only its political counterpart, when the Russians were successful in attaching nationalism with communism. With Castro, he went from the right end of the spectrum to the left. His reasoning, since the relation of the US could not be repaired, might as well rely on Soviet Union to protect the country from, the possibility of a takeover by the US. If the US could promote counter-revolution, Cuba, in legitimate defense, could promote revolution. The importance? The communization of Cuba would be the first step in the massive shift of political power on a world basis. That's what everything is about. Power, social, economic, and most of all, political power.